Dear students of class 10, today we will read and discuss the last part of the text, A Triumph of Surgery by James Herriot. Here in this part, we will see James Herriot and his colleagues were enjoying the time in the hospital by the help of Mrs. Pumphrey because she was sending eggs, wines, and other food items for the development of Tricky, and they were enjoying those food items. Okay, and at last she was informed about the recovery of the dog, and she took and received the dog, and the way she reacted, that is very important. Okay, so let's read. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. So before that, Mrs. Pumphrey was sending eggs and wine. Okay, now Mrs. Pumphrey sent brandy. What is brandy? A strong alcoholic spirit distilled from wine or fermented fruits. Means kind of costly wine. Okay, so we could hardly believe that. Means James Herriot and his colleagues couldn't believe that Mrs. Pumphrey would send brandy for the development of a dog that is Tricky. Okay, and when they received brandy, then what happened? For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. For a few nights, for some nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, was moved around from one's hand to another's hand, inhaled, smelled, and reverently drunk. Reverently means respectfully drunk. Means James Herriot and his colleagues inhaled, smelled the wine, and drank that wine, means brandy actually, respectfully. They were days of deep content, starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. Means that time was kind of very much satisfaction, content, satisfaction. Starting well with the extra egg in the morning means in the morning they used to eat eggs because Mrs. Pumphrey used to send 2 dozens of eggs. That's why they used to get eggs, right? Then improved and sustained by the midday wine. Improved. The time used to improve and sustain, maintain by the midday wine. Means at midday they used to drink wine and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. Means after that during evening or sometime. Okay, they used to drink brandy by the side of the fire. Winter season, that's why they used to enjoy the time very, means luxuriously, right? Now, so that's why luxuriously, in a luxurious manner, in a rich manner. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. It was a temptation, means they were tempted, they became greedy to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest. Means if they would keep Tricky as guest, then Mrs. Pumphrey would send eggs, wine, brandy, and they can consume those items. That's why they were kind of becoming greedy. They became greedy. They were tempted to keep him as a guest. But I knew, I means James Herriot knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering. Suffering means problem, problems. Okay, going through a tough phase means she used to love Tricky very much, and he was away, rather in the hospital. That's why she must have problems, so suffering. And after a fortnight, 15 days, felt compelled, means forced. Okay, she, not she, but he, James Herriot. Okay, felt compelled. Okay, uh, from his inner self. Okay, to phone, to call and tell her that the little dog had recovered. Tell Mrs. Pumphrey that the little dog had recovered. Now that dog is well and was awaiting collection. Means suppose you have given something to any shop and then you have to collect that. The same thing, Mrs. Pumphrey sent the dog to the hospital. Now she had to collect. That's why awaiting collection within minutes. So after the information, minutes. About 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. Within minutes, some minutes. About 30 feet of gleaming black metal. What do you mean by this line? Means 30 feet of length of gleaming black metal. Gleaming means shining black colored metal means a car. Okay, that is 30 feet of length and shining black colored came and just stood outside the surgeon, stopped outside the hospital. The sufferer opened the door and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey almost lost in the interior. The sufferer means the driver. Chauffeur. Sufferer opened the door and I could just make out. Make out means understand. The figure of Mrs. Pumphrey almost lost in the interior means in the interior, in the inside of the car, she kind of lost means you couldn't understand from outside, right? So means that's why the author said I could make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey almost lost in the interior means, and so kind of excited. Okay, also her hands were tightly clasped in front of her, so tightly she hold her hands in front of her and her lips trembled. That's why kind of excited, lost in excitement actually. So in front of her and her lips trembled, lips were trembling. Oh, Mr. Herriot, do tell me the truth. Is he really better? Oh, Mr. Herriot, do tell me the truth. Tell me the truth and do tell me. Kind of emphasizing, right? Putting force. Do tell me means she was excited. That's what I tell you. Do tell me the truth. Is he really better? Yes, he is fine. There is no need for you to get out of the car. I will go and fetch him. Means the surgeon said, yes, he is fine, well, no need for you to get out, to come out of the car, and I will go and fetch him. I will go and bring the dog. I walked through the house into the garden. So I walked through the house, into the house, into the garden, through the house. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. Right? So I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs means a group of dogs was hurtling round. Hurtling round means moving speedily. Hurtling, moving at a very high speed, round, and from this side, that side, kind of playing. on the lawn, means in that lawn, kind of yard, okay, and in their midst, in the middle, ears flapping, means the dog was flapping, moving his ears, tail waving, and also shaking its tail, waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky, golden colored figure of Tricky. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a lithe, okay, hard muscled animal. Lithe means flexible. That time he was like a kind of swollen that balloon or that food, okay, sausage, right? Now, lithe, flexible, hard muscle animal. He was keeping up well with the pack, with the group. Keeping means he was now staying, right, adjusting the pack group, stretching out in great bounds, and he was stretching, right, stretching out in great bounds, stretching in great bounds means he was, he was kind of stretching his arm, his limbs, legs properly in great bounds. That time he was the swollen sausage. Now he was stretching his legs, his chest almost brushing the ground. At that time, chest was almost touching the ground, but previously he was a swollen sausage. Means it was kind of impossible for him to stretch or to touch the chest uh, under the ground, means the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. I carried him back along the passage in the way to the front of the house, front side of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and was Tricky saw his mistress. He took up from my arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. And at the time also, the driver was holding the gate open. Okay, and as soon as Tricky saw his mistress, he took up from my arms. So from my arms, he just leapt a tremendous leap, means kind of big, kind of jumped and sailed into and reached into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. Okay, she gave a startled, means kind of amazed, and that kind of noise, oh, and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking, and then had to defend herself, had to stop herself, control herself. Because why? As she swarmed over her, so surrounded over her, licking her face and barking. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats, bowls, none of which had been used. So the items and they were sent by Mrs. Pumphrey. Toys, cushions, coats, bowls, so everything had been packed and none of which had been used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window, just kind of bending out of the window, okay, looking through the window. Tears shone in her eyes. So tears shone, okay, shining in her eyes. Her lips trembled, kind of shaking. Oh, Mr. Harriet, she cried, how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery. Means she was so much excited that she said, this is a triumph of surgery. Means suppose you love something very much, and that thing was going through or had been going through a tough phase, and at last you you were successful to get that thing back, right? Then a pet dog, pet cat. So then you are so much excited, so much thankful. Then you commented, same thing here. Mrs. Pumphrey also commented, this is a triumph of surgery, triumph, victory of surgery of the hospital. That she got back her that pet, that Tricky. That's all. Now we have to Do the question answer. Think about it. What kind of a person do you think the narrator, a veterinary surgeon is? What kind of person? Would you say he's a tactful as well as full of common sense? Tactful means skillful, tactful, tactics means he was enjoying the time, and also means and he knew how to recover, how to cure the dog, and as well as common sense. That's why he called also, and he understood that she must have problems. So tactful, she he was enjoying the foods, food items, and also kind of having common sense. Do you think Tricky was happy to go home? What do you think will happen now? What do you think? That you have to write. Do you think this is a real life episode or mere fiction? This means story. Or is it a mixture of both? So it must be mixture of both, because generally James Herriot talked about his real life experience, because he was also a veterinary surgeon, a vet. So kind of fact and fiction, mixture of fact and fiction. Next, this episode describes the silly behavior of a rich woman who is foolishly indulgent, perhaps because she is lonely. Do you think such people are merely silly, or can their actions cause harm to others? So describe silly behavior, kind of stupid behaviors of a rich woman. Yes, she was sending eggs, okay, up to dozen, wine, brandy, and also giving many food items to the dog earlier. So kind of silly, and also means uh, indulging everyone of his of her house to take care of the dog. So that's why silly. Do you think such people are lonely, merely silly? Can their actions cause harm to others? Harmful to others or not? Do you think there are also parents like Mrs. Pumphrey? Must be there. What do you have done if you were a member of the staff in the Mrs. Pumphrey's household, a neighbor, or what would your life have been like in general? And what do you have done if you were in the narrator's place? These are the questions you have to write. Thank you. Okay.